Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from right across the continent and pretty much the rest of the planet as well. Let's start with a quick run through the market here for you. Lots of red ink on the board for you today, with the exception, however, of Egypt as they wrap up their trading week. We'll also be keeping a close eye on Boeing shares. Relatively positive so far in the day, up 2.8% in fact at 15:32 GMT, which cuts losses made from the 10th of March to barely 1%. NSE Nigeria having an absolutely horrible quarter, fell by about 1/3% today. It shed nearly 6% so far this year. Steady decline, just continuing from February. EGX 30 closing out this trading week 4% higher. It's up nearly 17% so far in 2019. Here's what's coming up tonight. Ethiopia's government is considering legal action against Boeing over the fatal crash of ET302. South Africa's government unveils a new power rationing plan for the winter season. And talks between Conservative and Labour teams continue for a second day as part of efforts to break the deadlock about Brexit. We'll get to all of those in just a moment, but first let's start with what arguably is the biggest story of the day. Ethiopia's transport minister says that a preliminary report shows that the pilots on the doomed Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 followed proper procedures as specified by the manufacturer and still couldn't get their 737 MAX plane out of a dive. The minister urged the manufacturer of that aircraft to fix flight controls in order to avoid further disasters. Now, the report effectively adds pressure to Boeing to prove that its best-selling 737 MAX variant is safe after Flight 302 smashed into the ground some 6 minutes after takeoff on the 10th of March. That disaster was the second in barely 6 months involving a 737 MAX. A Lion Air plane plunged into the Java Sea in October, killing 189 people after an automatic system that can push the plane's nose down if stall is detected was activated, and the model is now grounded worldwide as investigators probe its airworthiness and how it got permission to fly in the first place.
The crew obtained the license and qualifications to conduct the flight. Repetitive, uncommanded aircraft nose-down conditions are noticed. The crew performed all the procedures repeatedly provided by the manufacturer, but was not able to control the aircraft. As the Ethiopian government, we're going to carry out the legal procedures as per the international procedures and as per our legal proceedings.
Right, then let's get you the latest from that briefing. CGTN's Chala was there when Ethiopia's Transport Minister delivering that report today. He joins us now live from Addis Ababa with more into the preliminary report into the crash of ET302. Girum, this report is initially due on the 3rd of April. Was any explanation given for why the 24-hour delay before its release occurred?
Rahmah, today is the 26th day since that plane crash happened, the unfortunate incident which killed all 157 passengers in it. And the investigators have told us that the delay was not necessarily a delay, according to them, because they have to follow an international law and that of the ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, which depicts that a preliminary report should come out in less than a month's time, and they're saying that 26 days we're doing just fine to release our report. But for us, it's still a delay. But they are saying that we are releasing this preliminary report within the month time that is given according to the international law, and we have delivered it. And as you have heard it from the minister herself, the result is simple, that the plane had technical issues, especially with that software MCAS, Rahmah.
Indeed. So for Ethiopian Airlines, this really does come as a vindication for Africa's biggest and, at this point, only profitable carrier, doesn't it?
Absolutely, Rahmah. Ethiopian Airlines time and again has been blamed by different media houses that its pilots were not fit enough to fly this plane. There is a training problem going on. That's why the pilots were not able to control that particular 737 MAX 8 plane. That's why it has crashed. So many accusations from different directions. Of course, ET has been saying time and again that these all accusations were baseless. Our pilots, we are proud of them. Every training necessary has been given for them. They can do more than flying the 737 MAX itself because they have been having proven experience. And now today, because of the preliminary report, as the minister was saying earlier, that all procedures have been followed as provided by Boeing itself, and they are now free of all accusations thanks to this investigation results. Indeed, vindications for ET, Rahmah.
Indeed. One last question for you. So now we have this preliminary report, but when will the full detailed report of exactly what went wrong in ET 302, when is that report going to be coming out?
According to ICAO, again, according to the International Civil Aviation Organization procedures, and particularly to that of Annex 13, the main report should come out within 6 months to 1 year time. That is the procedure these investigations are now should follow. Rahmah, from Boeing itself and other international organizations, there are 18 members involved apart from Ethiopian authorities from the Transport Ministry and Ethiopian Airlines. So these people are going to work on the detailed work of what really happened, explaining to, the software problems and other related problems in this report, which is supposed to come out in 6 months to a year time. So they're going to follow that Annex 13 rules and regulations. Simply, we have to wait, I think, at least a year to hear what they have to say about the detailed report.
Indeed. So therefore, we should mark our calendars for the end of March 2020. Girum Chala in Addis Ababa. Thank you. Now, the lawyers representing the families of the victims killed in Indonesia's Lion Air crash hoped to bring charges against Boeing along with the recent Ethiopian air crash, as both incidents were pretty similar. Hammond Law Group's lawyer Mark Lindquist says that the legal team is trying to have the Lion Air case heard in the United States, as it is, in his words, where the evidence of Boeing's wrongdoing is. The legal team is also getting requests to represent victims' families of the March 10th crash of Flight 8302. 8 Kenyan families who lost relatives in the Ethiopian Airlines crash have also filed a lawsuit in the United States. All right, then, so let's bring in the perspective from Washington, D.C. CGTN's Giles Gibson has been following this story from that end of the world. He joins us now. So, Giles, Boeing, let's start with the company. They reportedly charged extra for safety features like an angle of attack sensor in the 737 MAX and a warning system in case data from one set of sensors is in conflict with the other. But given how crucial these devices are for safe operation of an aircraft, how in the first place is any of this even legal?
Well, Rahmah, according to one report that I've read, airlines spend between $800,000 and $2 million on all the different options when it comes to buying a 737 MAX 8 jet. And the reason that this is legal is because regulators around the world don't require the airlines to take up all of these different safety features. There are only certain ones that come as standard and certain ones that are actually required. Now, what Boeing have said is that they are going to make one of those optional features standard on all their 737 MAX aircraft. That's a feature that's known as the disagree light. What it does is it tells the pilot if there is a difference between the two sensors that he has on the plane that are feeding information back to him during that flight.
Indeed, so the company, of course, is also facing a range of suits and legal probes into how the 737 got its, the 737 MAX got its flight certification. But what's the latest on that front?
Well, just this week we've heard that the family of a US citizen who was killed in the Ethiopian Airlines crash, they're moving forward with a lawsuit against the manufacturer Boeing here in the United States. But we're also expecting them, it hasn't been finalized yet, but we're also expecting them to file a lawsuit against the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, here in the United States, around the way that these 737 MAX jets were regulated and approved. We also understand that there are relatives of around 30 victims of the Lion Air crash last year who are moving forward with some sort of a lawsuit against Boeing, and we expect that number to rise in the coming weeks and months.
Indeed. So let me pull back a bit here, because Boeing and its planes really haven't been touched in this retaliatory set of tariffs coming in from China. But given this specific incident, are they more likely now to be a target in trade talks between the two economies?
Well, actually, the concerns around Boeing's safety record in recent weeks could actually affect the trade talks between the US and China, because China has pledged to buy $1.2 trillion of extra US goods over the next 6 years. And experts say that a big chunk of that $1.2 trillion shopping list was actually going to be made up of Boeing planes. So what the Chinese are going to have to do if they don't decide to buy more Boeing planes, for example, for Chinese airlines, they're going to have to try and make up the shortfall for that $1 trillion shopping list in other sectors and other areas.
Indeed. One last question for you. So Boeing initially had forecasts that they would deliver some 900 planes to a range of clients this year. 600 of those were going to be these 737 MAX variants. But now that the entire fleet is grounded and deliveries are not happening, and approval for any MCAS fixes might stretch out into the third quarter, how does that affect their revenue and their margins for this year?
Well, there are two ways really which this is going to affect Boeing's sort of medium and in the short term. Firstly, there's been these delays to Boeing sending these updates to the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. They were expected to send those in last week, updates to their 737 MAX jets. They are now expected to send them in really in the next few weeks, so there'll be certainly a lot of pressure on them to get those updates approved by regulators here in the United States. The other side of this is that they're also facing a lot of pressure simply to hang on to orders that they already have in their order book. Garuda Airlines in Indonesia, they recently cancelled a 50-plane $4.9 billion order for 737 MAX jets, although it has to be said just in the last few days an airline in Brazil known as Gol Airlines, they've said that they will be moving forward with an order for 100 737 MAX jets.
Indeed. Charles Gibson, live from Washington, D.C. Thank you for the update. Now then, let's come back to matters on the continent. The International Monetary Fund is urging Nigeria's federal government to eliminate tax incentives and reform its value-added tax law as part of efforts to stimulate economic growth. The IMF says Nigeria's economy is recovering, but only just. It says that real GDP went up by 1.9% last year, up from 0.8% in 2017, on the back of improvements in manufacturing and services. The growth is also supported by spillovers from much higher oil prices, the ongoing convergence in exchange rates, and efforts to improve the business environment as a whole. The fund, however, notes that headline inflation fell to 11.4% at the end of 2018, reflecting a decline in food prices, weak consumer demand, and a relatively stable exchange rate and tight monetary policy during most of 2018. That said, the figure does remain well outside of the central bank's target range of anywhere between 6 to 9%. On to trade matters now. The African Union is ready to implement the Continental Free Trade Area after getting the minimum threshold needed for this deal, the FTA, to come into force. Gambia is a country we have to thank for that. It's the 22nd country to ratify the protocol. The CFTA is expected to boost intra-African trade and give opportunities to 1.2 billion people on the continent, and by so doing, increase the continent's GDP, which is currently around $2.5 trillion. CGTN's Coletta Njohi spoke to Stephen Keringi. He's the Director of Regional Integration at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa.
You notice that most of the trade that Africa has with the rest of the world is more on raw materials. Raw materials do not necessarily create as much jobs as if you add value to that raw material. So the intra-African trade, which the AfCFTA will be facilitating and making it more efficient and effective, is more on value-added goods, and that is where the jobs are going to come from. But maybe I may also want to add that the CFTA will also be helping the small traders in the protocols that have been negotiated. There is foreseen what we call a simplified trade regime that will make it possible for Africans, even those who have businesses where they have to move merchandise of about $1,000, $1,200, they don't have to incur the huge costs that one would need to trade, because the CFTA already has instruments that will facilitate that kind of trade.
What is the current status of the implementation of the CFTA as a continent? Because we understand there are some protocols that still need to be agreed on.
What we are doing as the Economic Commission for Africa, working closely with the African Union Commission, is actually to go to the member states. We have come up with guidelines for development of the AfCFTA national strategies. And the way those national strategies are framed is whereby, first of all, you look at the big macro of each economy. What are the issues in that economy? And then you ask yourself, where do the comparative advantages, competitiveness lie in this particular economy? So that even as the country does its scheduling of the areas that it wants to open to the other African economies, it also knows what it needs to do to be able to benefit. So the key thing that countries need to do is they have to have implementation strategy.
Some African member states have voiced concern that with the CFTA, they might lose out on revenue.
Our work at the ECA, we have also looked at the work that the IMF has been doing. We've looked at the work that the World Bank has done on this question of the fiscal impacts of the CFTA. And our findings and our conclusion is that the fiscal implications in terms of the negative impacts on the revenues as you implement the CFTA is going to be very minimal. And that is the first round effect. By the time you're moving to the second round effect, if you have a good strategy for benefiting from the CFTA, you already start seeing the emergence of new businesses or new opportunities for the young people, for the small traders, and those now gives you as a government as an opportunity to be able to realize other sources of revenue, be it VAT or excise taxes or the other tax heads that a country needs to tax to finance its development. So essentially, we are optimistic.
All right, and a quick run through some company headlines from across Africa. Vodacom Tanzania says the country's government is accusing it of causing a near $5 million tax revenue loss, and that's linked to allegations of fraudulent use of network facilities. Charges have been laid against its managing director and other executives. A bail application for the individuals in police custody will be heard in the next few days. The company also says it has appointed a South African national, Jacques Marais, as acting managing director. IHS Holding plans to enter new markets in the Middle East and Southeast Asia to bulk up ahead of a potential attempt to sell shares either in New York or in London. Africa's largest operator of the telecommunications towers is looking to build on two recent deals, one in Saudi Arabia, the other in Kuwait. It's based in Mauritius and it has operations in Nigeria as well as other African countries. IHS is looking to raise about $1 billion when it eventually does list. Kenya's Uchumi supermarket is set to lose its second branch in 3 months. It's accelerating the cash-strapped retailer's effective decline. The retailer's branch landlord in Meru, City Square Properties Limited, has sued the retailer, claiming over $230,000 in rent arrears, stretching for over 21 months. City Square Properties is looking to have the lease terminated. It's accusing the retailer of failing to stick to its agreement. And finally, Japanese prosecutors have entered Carlos Ghosn's residence early on Thursday morning to ask him to submit to questioning over payments made by Nissan Motors to an Omani dealer when he was chairman of that car maker. The arrest comes just today after Ghosn pledged on Twitter that he would hold a news conference on the 11th of April to, in his words, tell the truth about the allegations against him. That's a run through your company headlines. It's about 18:20 GMT, time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be looking at the latest power rationing plan in South Africa ahead of the winter season. And Uganda fish exports are rising as a ban on illegal fishing takes shape.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why.
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's focus on South Africa. The Public Enterprises Minister over there, Pravin Gordhan, has laid out Eskom's plan for electricity supply during the winter season. South Africans should now suffer a bit less load shedding, but as Angelo Kupolo reports, not everyone is convinced.
The minister says they now have a much clearer understanding of the generation issues at the power stations, and he anticipates that there would be a total of 26 days of load shedding for the winter season.
It's impossible for anybody, least of all the minister, to dictate what the cap should be on Eskom's load shedding. Load shedding is a release valve for the grid when it's under pressure. And if the minister has now capped Eskom at stage 1 or 1,000 megawatts load shedding, we are now 30% or more closer to a grid meltdown. Because if that's the instruction and the Eskom officials at the control centre don't exceed that, they put the whole grid at risk.
The power utility has a range of experts looking at the situation, and some are presenting solutions, but there's a perceived lack of action.
A practical solution, for instance, would have been to go and hire 4 gigawatts of barges. He's got 2 months to which to bring them here, and the cost would be equal to 3 days of load shedding. He himself is forecasting 26 days of load shedding. So why doesn't he follow common sense?
The country has just emerged from a sustained bout of load shedding, and people are fed up. Added to which, they have just seen electricity prices increase from 1 April, placing further strain on household budgets.
And really, that's why we're in dire straits, is because of all the interference and the stealing and the corruption that's been going on at Eskom for more than 10 years. And as a member of the public, I say this far and no further. Enough is enough.
Eskom did everything in its power to provide uninterrupted electricity recently and failed, despite exhausting the country's diesel supply to keep the open-cycle gas turbine power stations running at full tilt. If it's about keeping the lights on at any cost, it's going to cost the country and the taxpayer dearly in the longer term. I'm Angelo Kupolo for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to Zimbabwe now. The country's finance minister, Mtulinkube, is accusing local businesses there of profiteering, of linking the price increases of basic goods to the exchange rate on the new transitional currency. Now, the introduction of what's being locally described as the RTGS dollar in February has seen a 60% increase in the price of commodities as diverse as sugar and cooking oil and even rice. The food shortage has been driven by hyperinflation, with the year-on-year rate going up to nearly 60% in February. The RTGS dollar currently trades at about 4.3 to the dollar on the black market, compared to 2.5 when it launched in February. Although trade in the RTGS dollar is currently restricted, the currency could come under much more pressure if the country imports grain as a consequence of drought. The finance minister says the annual inflation rate is expected to fall below 10% by December this year. Over in East Africa, Uganda is exporting a lot more fish. The country's Export Promotions Board says the growth it has registered is due to a significant increase in fishing stock. This comes, of course, as the government cracks down on illegal fishing activities. CGTN's Michael Beleke has been looking at the numbers.
Selling to the highest bidder, the fish market in Uganda is booming once again. The recent clampdown on illegal fishing practices is seeing results.
And you know what? Fish which had gone way down, even to below 100 million US dollars. In 2018, we got over 171 million US dollars.
Growing pressure on Uganda's lakes over the last 2 decades had resulted in the depletion of fish stocks. But now, Factories that previously had to close shop have reopened, and the government is targeting fish farming to further reduce dependency on the lakes.
We are going to release the pressure from our natural lakes. Not everybody should go to the lake to get fish. Some people should really farm these fish. So government is going to help, especially the youth and the women and other people.
However, not everyone is better off. The increased supply of fish has come with market challenges. Thousands of fishermen in Uganda live off the waters of Lake Victoria, but the low price of fish at the local market is threatening their livelihoods. The Nile perch species is the most traded fish in the export market, but fishermen say they are not breaking even at the current price.
We are catching more than enough fish, but the market cannot take it all. So we want government to allow us preserve the fish by smoking, as we previously did, to avoid losses.
Prices have gone down due to increased supply. This is good for the local people who previously could not afford fish on their menu.
For some time now, Uganda has been relying on the European Union market to take much of its fish exports. But as stocks continue to multiply, authorities in Uganda are looking to new markets like China to absorb the excess. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
On to North Africa, where officials in Tunisia say that Chinese firms will get priority in the North African country's infrastructure projects, especially as far as the building of harbours and railways are concerned. Several agreements were inked between Tunisian and Chinese firms at a recent business forum involving the two sides. CGTN's Anin Chachi was there.
The Tunisian-Chinese Business Forum was held in Tunis. The Minister of Investment said the level of Chinese investment in Tunisia is still very low and does not reflect the relations between both countries.
The overall volume of Chinese investment in Tunisia does not surpass $6 million. 11 Chinese companies are currently based in Tunisia. The volume of trade between both countries reached about $1.6 billion in 2018. We are willing to increase trade and economic cooperation with China.
According to Chinese officials, Tunisia is considered as a gateway to Africa and Europe. The Chinese officials proposed boosting cooperation so as to develop basic infrastructure in Tunisia.
This time we bring the delegation coming to Tunisia. Our delegates found there is a great potentiality between the cooperation between Tunisian business people and the Chinese business people. A lot of the company we come in here, some of them are construction company, infrastructure construction company. They are one of the biggest in China.
The Vice President of the Confederation of Businessmen, Utica, pointed out that several food and industrial products, such as wires and automotive components, can access the Chinese market.
We recommend the implementation of a Chinese financing line that will help Tunisian enterprises buy Chinese cutting-edge equipment with affordable prices. In addition, Tunisian exports to China must be boosted.
Tunisian enterprise will partake in 3 international economic events organized by China in 2019, namely the China International Import-Export, the China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo, and the China Arab States Expo.
The Ministry of Investment and International Cooperation has announced that a new committee will be created at the Tunisian Investment Authority with a mission to grant the necessary authorizations for the achievement of mega projects in partnership with China. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
A group of youngsters in Johannesburg have been given an opportunity to learn something different. An award-winning jewellery designer is teaching them gemology, science of gemstones if you prefer. Jewellery design, cutting, polishing, all of this takes years of education, hands-on training and experience. But these young students are getting quite the head start. CGTN's Simucha Naidu has the details.
Obile Nkosi couldn't afford to study engineering. Instead, he studied at a jewellery school after receiving a bursary. Nkosi is now a successful businessman that wants to give back. so he's teaching his trade to youngsters.
Being in a country where we know we've got diamonds and gemstones and raw materials in our doorsteps, I think it's very, very important for them to understand these materials that exist, number one, and two, how are they used and how are they being costed in terms of for reading and things like that. But at a very early age, we create the interest.
Nkosi has teamed up with the Gemology Institute of America and hotel group Tsogo Sun to ensure his initiative empowers as many young South Africans as possible.
If you look at the past 10 years, you'll see that the industry itself has, especially in South Africa, the jewelry manufacturing industry has socially declined. This is simply because most of the raw materials goes outside the country and then it is sold in South Africa. So there's not many people doing the beneficiation, and which is quite critical. So I think it is important that with such initiatives they're supported, because then we can start to have a community of not only black but also Indian, white, Chinese kids in South Africa learning about the industry and taking it as a career.
South Africa can certainly use the skills. The government has been trying to push plans for more beneficiation, creating value chains so that the country doesn't only mine but also manufactures finished products.
Today was pretty interesting. We learned about different types of rocks, and we also learned the cycle of rocks, like how it became rock, like from lava. It was cooled down from water to become rock.
We talked about gemstones and we learned what they did by GIA.
My day was kind of nice because I had to learn how to do jewelry, and I learned so much today about rocks.
Nkosi is becoming a national jewel himself. His designs have won several awards locally and internationally. South Africans especially are proud to show off their locally crafted jewelry pieces. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
It's time for another break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. Talks between the Conservative and Labour teams continue for second day as part of a quest to break deadlock in Brexit. And trade talks between China and the United States also continue over in Washington. We'll have the latest. For economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
See, business in Africa.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns, the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back. These are the stories making you headlines at this hour. Ethiopia's transport minister says a preliminary report shows that the pilots on the doomed Ethiopian Airlines flight followed proper procedures and still couldn't get the 737 MAX, a plane barely 6 months old, out of a dive. The minister urged the manufacturer of that plane, Boeing, to fix flight controls in order to avoid further disaster. That report effectively adds to pressure on Boeing to prove that its best-selling 737 MAX is safe to operate after Flight 302 smashed into the ground about 6 minutes after takeoff on the 10th of March. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has expressed deep concern about the potential of an armed showdown in Libya. The Eastern military, loyal to Commander Khalifa Haftar, have advanced towards the western end of the oil-producing nation. Guterres has called for dialogue to resolve the Libyan crisis. He arrived in Tripoli on Wednesday in order to work on peace talks. Uganda's Inspector General of Police has joined rescue efforts for an American tourist and driver who were kidnapped at the Queen Elizabeth National Park. The pair were reportedly taken by unknown gunmen while on a game drive in western Uganda. And finally, Algeria's Constitutional Court has declared the country's presidency to be vacant. This comes after the country's former leader, 82-year-old Abdelaziz Bouteflika, resigned after weeks of protests. The president of the Council of Nations now assumes the post of head of state for a maximum period of 90 days. During this period, presidential elections will be organized in which a former head of state cannot be a candidate. However, protests still continue in the North African gas producer. That's a wrap of your headlines. On to Brexit now. The British government redoubled efforts on Thursday to win over the main opposition party in a last-gasp effort to avoid a chaotic no-deal exit from the European Union. The latest round of talks comes after lawmakers fast-tracked a bill on Wednesday that wants to delay Brexit. The Prime Minister is racing against the clock in a desperate search for votes and at least a parliamentary majority that should still push through her thrice-rejected divorce deal through Parliament. A spokesman for the Prime Minister said there would be intensive discussions on Thursday due to the urgency of the situation. The UK's latest deadline to leave the EU is the 12th of April, and resistance to Mrs May's plan remains passionately strong. At the same time, the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, says that the risk of a no-deal Brexit is now, in his view, alarmingly high. Carney also said that frictionless trade in a no-deal Brexit scenario was, and I'm quoting him here, absolute nonsense.
We're in a situation where the expressed will of Parliament is for some form of deal. So to put it in the double negative, as they've expressed it, Parliament is against no deal. The government, as expressed by the Prime Minister, is against no deal. The European Union is against no deal. And yet it is a possibility, it is the default option. And so no deal would happen, as we sit here today, would happen by accident. Yeah. It would happen suddenly. There would be no transition, what we have just discussed. If overnight it has to pay a large tariff on those goods, which it will, because Europe will flip to WTO, and forget the fiction that that won't happen.
Article 24.
Absolute nonsense, okay? It needs to be called out.
Right, and Richard Bestick has been tracking the twists and turns of Brexit for the better part of 2 years now. He joins us now live from London with the latest. So, Richard, just before midnight, MPs voted 330 to 312 to force through a bill that effectively would stop a no-deal exit. But where does this bill fit into the wider debate about how the UK will leave the EU?
Well, Rahmah, that vote to stop a no-deal Brexit is possibly a barometer of the hectic pace at which the UK Parliament is scrambling to put together something, anything, to prevent Britain leaving the European Union next week without some kind of deal in place. If it gets through in time, and they're still chatting about it in the Parliament's upper chamber, the House of Lords, then it will compel the Prime Minister to seek permission from the European Union for a further extension to Brexit rather than a no deal. But of course, as you suggest, Rahmah, it comes in tow with the talks between Prime Minister Theresa May and the Labour opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, seeing if there's any compromise they can stick together. We were also expecting some more indicative votes Monday, but a massive water leak in the House of Commons has shut that down, and we'll see if they're ready on Tuesday. What it all adds up to, Rahmah, is a massive round of beat the clock on several fronts.
Indeed. Is it too soon, perhaps? One of those that when it rains, it pours jokes in here. But let's leave that aside for the moment. Both sides have to give up something of some sort to make this last-ditch gamble work. So what are the Tories, other than the militant Eurosceptic wing, what are the Tories willing to give up?
Well, it would seem not much. Trouble is, Rahmah, while both leaders might be able to conjure up something, they also at the same time risk tearing their parties asunder in the process. Labour wants a continued membership of the EU's customs union, and while Corbyn might just about be able to persuade the Prime Minister, she'd struggle to persuade her party. They're angry enough that she's talking to Corbyn in the first place. The Labour side has pressures of its own, but it's the clock that's the big enemy here. May's unlikely to have a clear plan ready in time for the EU Emergency Council meeting next Wednesday. So she'll be asking for a Brexit extension based on the merit of just talking to Corbyn. And if that's the case, the EU, if they give anything at all, might be likely talking of a long delay, meaning Britain could be contesting the European Union elections, which will be strange given the circumstances. And it would be interesting to read the party's manifestos, wouldn't it?
Indeed, it certainly would. But let's look at the markets for a moment here. The pound, quite the indicator that we've all been keeping an eye on. It's gained about 3% against the dollar so far this year. But how are businesses coping with all the uncertainty around Brexit?
Amazingly, the UK economy has been actually standing up quite well despite the pressures from Brexit. Inflation's low and employment's high. Investment on a national scale is the worry, as are the mutterings from the big beasts of the industrial world, the Hondas and Nissans, all talking about leaving. For smaller traders, it's the continual to and fro of preparing for no deal and the impact on their businesses. They say it's wasting time and it's wasting money, not really what Britain bought into in the referendum 2.5 years ago, perhaps.
Indeed. One last question for you. The 12th of April, that's a new deadline day. That's now just, what, 7 days away? So if these cross-party talks implode, what other options does the UK have, other than, of course, crashing out without a deal?
Well, that is still a possibility. You're right, Rahmah. The whole Brexit project has come down to the tyranny of time over politics. If, and it is still an if, Britain can avoid crashing out, then there's the prospect of a long delay, and who knows, the entire Brexit project being driven deep into the long grass, where I'm sure, Rahmah, we'll find a huge collection of battered old cans that have been kicked down a variety of Brexit roads.
Indeed, and there were simpler times when all we had to worry about was what Brexit actually meant. Thank you for the update. That's Rich Vestic there live in London. Now, trade talks between China and the United States, the number 2 and the number 1 economy in the world at the moment, still continue. Officials from both sides are meeting in Washington. The Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, to the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and the U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin on Wednesday. Beijing and Washington have been locked in talks for the last 4 months. In the meantime, the White House says that the U.S. President Donald Trump will meet the Vice Premier later on Thursday. CGTN's reporter Wang Wei has been following the talks and has the latest information coming out of China's Commerce Ministry.
Beijing has released little information about this 9th round of talks now underway in Washington, D.C., so far only repeating the principles it has taken into the negotiations.
China is willing to work with the American team to make efforts together to seriously implement the important consensus reached by the two leaders during their meeting in Argentina.
The pace of the talks has quickened. The recent 2 rounds were held less than a week apart, but the spokesman was tight-lipped about the details of the recently finished 8th round as well. What consensus did you reach in the 8th round of trade talks, which just finished last week? How did it prepare for this new round?
They discussed related wording and made new progress. It has created good conditions for the 9th round of talks.
With a few public words to go on, the world looks to what actions are being taken. That might hint at progress behind closed doors. China's State Council recently announced Beijing will postpone tariffs on vehicles and the vehicle parts made in the U.S. And Beijing said it will keep its deadline for those tariffs open. This corresponds to Washington's action to postpone the increase of tariffs from 10% to 25% on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods.
The actions taken by the two sides undoubtedly will help create a good atmosphere for the China-U.S. trade talks.
These actions extend earlier commitments made by the presidents of both nations when they met at the G20 summit in Argentina on December 1st last year. There, they reached the 90-day truce and decided to negotiate a deal during this period. The recent 2 talks were back-to-back, and the Beijing statement about them was quite brief. Some experts believe that the negotiations are in their final stage, and both Beijing and Washington want to limit the published information about the talks, so the 2 teams and the decisions won't be disturbed by outside factors. Wang Hui, CGTN, Beijing.
Goldman Sachs recently announced that it's adopting a much more casual dress code, and many see it as a bid to try and attract younger talent and project a more appealing, inclusive image, perhaps, that mirrors some of the most innovative companies in the world. But often those are tech companies, not finance ones. Here's Karina Huber with more on what some are calling the end of an era.
That's a wonderful suit. Don't tell me, let me guess. Valentino Couture.
That scene in the 2000 film American Psycho captured Wall Street's long affinity for finely tailored suits. But times are changing. Goldman Sachs recently joined several other banks in announcing it would be ditching the suit and tie only dress code for its employees. The firm had already relaxed clothing requirements in 2017 for those working in its digital and technology divisions. In an email to staff, the 150-year-old bank said, given the changing nature of workplaces generally in favor of a more casual environment, we believe this is the right time to move to a firm-wide flexible dress code. The memo was signed by Goldman CEO David Solomon, who also moonlights as a DJ. Some experts believe the change is about wanting to attract millennials, who might be more drawn to the work culture in Silicon Valley. But fashion and retail consultant Robert Burke says the move is also about branding.
I think it also is making sure that Goldman Sachs looks and feels modern like some of the most successful companies, which happen to be tech companies.
The email didn't specify what exactly constitutes a flexible dress code. It simply stated employees should use good judgment in wearing clothes that are appropriate for the workplace. Burke advises it's better to err on the side of caution.
One doesn't want to go into the polar fleece kind of vortex of wearing vests. That takes it in a different way and probably would influence the way the customer of a Goldman Sachs would look at their executives.
The work uniform of today may be more casual, but experts say Wall Street's obsession with status isn't going anywhere. They say accessories will become even more important markers of success as the suit and tie goes out of fashion. Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
All right, and a quick run through commodity prices here for you. So today was the day some thought we might actually crack $70 a barrel. Oil clearly didn't happen. A metal that has grabbed our attention, though, platinum, it's having one hell of a run in the last 4 weeks. It's up by over 10%. Don't eliminate possible supply disruptions from that equation, though, because one of South Africa's biggest unions, AMCU, is looking to appeal a ruling that stopped it from expanding its strike at Zimbabwe gold into other mining companies, platinum included. Spot platinum was up over 3% at nearly $900 at 15.37 GMT. Here's what's coming up next. Coming up next, we'll have a conversation with an award-winning winemaker who's putting Rwanda on the global map.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Let's take you to Rwanda, where an award-winning winemaker is putting that country on the map. Her name is Assumpta Uwamaria, and she's not your average winemaker. She's not using grapes. She's using an entirely healthy option to produce dry red wine. Kyonele Lupuana tells us more.
Indigenous wines are not a popular commodity in East Africa, and a young Rwandan entrepreneur is using that opportunity to grow her business. When you think of wine ingredients, grapes come to mind, but Assumpta Uwamaria is switching things up with a special vegetable ingredient popular for its health benefits.
When I was working at a fruit and vegetable market, it wasn't satisfying. My boss at the time didn't pay very well, plus I had dreams of working for myself. I often thought, if these vegetables came from Rubavu, at my home, why can't I plant something and make a profit? I then started farming. I thought it would bring immediate profit, but I made a loss the first time round.
Uwamaria turned to beetroot to make what has now become a very popular wine in Rwanda. A trained clinical psychologist, Uwamaria didn't find it easy here at first. But she didn't give up. Instead, the 28-year-old took Skype lessons, first on how to make juice. Wasn't long until Uwamaria learned how to use beetroot as a major ingredient to produce dry red wine. Beets are high in immune-boosting vitamin C, fiber, and essential minerals like manganese, which is good for your bones, liver, kidney, and pancreas.
First, I go to the farm, assess which beetroots are good enough, because if some are not ripe enough, they won't make good wine. I prepare and put them in the machine for blending, boil, and let the beetroot juice cool. Once it's stored in these baskets, I have to make sure that this room is the right temperature for fermentation. After 4 months, I sieve the juice, store it in the tanks for another 4 months until it's fermented.
Before Karisimbi wine hits the shelves, the Rwanda Standards Board first tests the product. Once approved, the wine is packaged and ready for the market. For a little under $6, she sells her wine at local kiosks in Kigali as well as in Rubavu, just outside the capital city. An online platform for made-in-Rwanda products has made it easier for Karisimbi wines to reach international customers. It's already drawn interest from China.
I'm getting an opportunity to enter the Chinese market through a previous interview I did with France 24. Someone from China saw the clip and reached out to me via WeChat. The client asked me to start sending them wine, but they had asked for a large quantity which I couldn't immediately produce. Exporting large quantities requires that I get an RSB certificate. That's what I'm organizing at the moment in order to deliver the wine by June.
Assumpta Maria is currently producing wine from her home in Rubavu with the help of 6 permanent workers. But as her client base grows, she plans on building a bigger processing plant, exploring with different flavors like banana and pineapple, as well as hire 30 more people from her community. Shanela Lupuana, Rubavu in western Rwanda.
In Tanzania, a new project is encouraging young girls to stay in school. It's been founded by a former beauty pageant contestant who is now one of the country's youngest politicians. This project focuses on building schools and training teachers as well. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more.
With each brick, Jokate Mwegelo's vision for better education and an equal chance for girls to stay in school and excel becomes a reality. The former beauty pageant queen turned entrepreneur, now one of Tanzania's youngest district commissioners, is making big changes. Tokomeza Zero, which means banish zeros, is a campaign that aims to reduce the number of students failing at the national examinations level by building schools and motivating teachers.
I strongly believe that there isn't a kid that is not able to learn, but there are kids that lack guidance, leadership, and mentorship.
In order to improve the learning infrastructure and help children stay in school, she has organized a gala to raise funds for the campaign. It is estimated that the enrollment rate of secondary school-age students in Tanzania is only 31%, with an even lower rate for girls. Very few are able to complete their secondary education. Along with the building of schools, the program has also created after-school camps. At these camps, students can have an extra meal as well as get tutoring for subjects they find a challenge. High dropout rates for girls are usually caused by early marriages, lack of funds for educational supplies, and long distances to schools. Jokate's program aims to build a one-of-a-kind boarding school in Kisarawe to ensure that girls stay in school and do not have to travel long distances. They also educate the community on the importance of education.
We have put in place more strategies this year and started the camps earlier, so we expect the students to do better than last year.
Jokate hopes that an improved learning environment will inspire these girls to strive for more, despite the limitations they face. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
And let's wrap up the program with a run through the currencies and related matters. So earlier today, the Director General of Nigeria's Debt Office said that the unit plans to issue 30-year Naira-denominated bonds sometime this quarter. Now, given that average rates on short-term notes the country the 14% range, it'll be pretty interesting to see what sort of demand and, of course, price these notes to attract. Rates on short-term paper in Kenya, that just keeps falling. The $100 million in 364-day notes on the offer today, 6 times as many bids. The coupon rate was just over 9%, 2/10 of what was available at last week's auction. Those are your currencies, and that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to see your thoughts on what you've seen here in the last hour. So several ways of getting your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Rahmah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.